Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, will be on the hot seat. They'll appear before the Commons Finance Committee and answer questions about how and why the We charity was tapped to run a multi-million-dollar student grant program. That contract has since been cancelled, and the opposition parties are accusing the Liberals of cronyism, helping out their friends. Kathleen Harris gives us a preview.
Only a handful of sitting prime ministers have testified at a parliamentary committee in Canadian political history. Mike Morden is with the Samara Centre for Democracy.
Generally speaking, prime ministers do not appear at committees for any reason, and it's been incredibly rare for prime ministers to be summoned in this way to defend themselves.
University of Toronto political scientist Nelson Wiseman doubts Trudeau will shed much new light on the matter.
He will deflect questions. The Conservatives are going to come in there with spears, burning spears. The NDP will poke away as well. But you don't get cross-examination. You get to chew up the time.
Wiseman believes Canadians are preoccupied with the pandemic right now, and that might limit the political damage to the Trudeau government. Kathleen Harris, CBC News, Ottawa.
Every single one of us in this province has been asked to, and the vast majority have changed how we are living each and every day. You all need to as well. If you don't, many will get sick in your community. Some will get very sick. Some will die.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe sending a warning to the province's Hutterite communities. They must follow pandemic guidelines. While many are physically distancing, some are sticking to their traditional communal way of living. There were 50 new COVID-19 cases reported in Saskatchewan yesterday, and most were linked to Hutterite colonies. But Hutterite leaders, such as David Shetter, want the Premier to stop singling them out.
It invites and incites discrimination. This will further force our reasonable community leaders underground and into hiding.
The Premier says health officials will visit all the province's Hutterite colonies to provide information on the practices that stop the spread of COVID-19. In Australia, at least 13 people died of COVID-19 on Thursday, the most deaths the country has seen in one day since the pandemic began. And in the state of Victoria, there were more than 700 new infections. The state's Premier, Daniel Andrews, says face masks are now mandatory.
Everyone in regional Victoria, and therefore everyone across the whole state, will have to wear a mask, and I stress, or a face covering whenever they're out of their home.
There are concerns the lockdown measures in Melbourne are not working this time. In a surprise move, China disqualified 12 pro-democracy candidates from this September's elections in Hong Kong. The dozen activists are well-known and outspoken critics of Beijing. China says they are not fit to run for office. Among the reasons given, that they are opposed to Hong Kong's new security law, which puts the territory firmly under Beijing's rule. And finally, Mars is getting yet another visitor. Nicole Martellero has more.
Is there life on Mars?
It's a question that has been on the minds of astronomers for centuries. Was there once life on Mars? NASA's Perseverance rover, the newest in its fleet of Mars robots, now has an important job to do, to figure out if life was once able to thrive there. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine explains the mission.
This is the first time in history where we're going to go to Mars with an explicit mission to find life on another world. We don't know if life existed there or not.
While we don't expect to see any little green people, finding past traces of life, even microbial, would be a monumental discovery for scientists wondering if Earth is the only planet to have hosted life. Nicole Mortellero, CBC News, Toronto.
And that is your World this hour.
From CTV News at 8:58 p.m. yesterday.
I'm Marilla Fernandez from the CTV National Newsroom. Here are your top stories. The Federal Ethics Commissioner will look into trips taken by the finance minister's family, partly paid for by the We Group. Bill Morneau is already being investigated for other ties to the organization. The Prime Minister will testify at the Finance Committee hearing about his ties to the We charity. We got a contract to run a $500 million program for Ottawa for students. Toronto and the surrounding Peel region have officially got the green light to move into stage 3 of reopening Friday. Restrictions will be relaxed for bars and restaurants, and gyms can reopen. Most students in BC will get back to class full-time in September. They will be in bubbles to limit the spread of COVID-19. For all the day's top stories and breaking news, tune into CTV News Channel or go online, ctvnews.ca. I'm Marilla Fernandez.
From CNBC Tech Check at 3:47 p.m. yesterday.
I'm Josh Lipton with your CNBC Tech Check. The stage is set for a high-stakes antitrust hearing on Capitol Hill. The CEOs of Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, and Facebook are all set to testify virtually before House lawmakers. In prepared remarks, all four plan to highlight the heavy competition their companies face and tout their contributions to the U.S. economy. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is expected to stress that antitrust legislation would only benefit Chinese rivals. Meanwhile, Spotify shares are under pressure after the company posted a wider-than-expected loss last quarter. Sales also came in slightly below forecast as ad-supported revenue fell 21%. On the bright side, though, Spotify did see a 29% jump in total monthly active users to 299 million, and a 27% jump in premium subscribers to 139 million. And Visa shares are also trading lower, beat Wall Street expectations, but volume dropped as consumers and businesses dramatically slowed spending amid the coronavirus pandemic. Visa says it's starting to see payment volume tick up, but it's not giving any guidance for the rest of the year. That's all the news from the West Coast. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
From DW News Brief at 2 a.m. today.
This is DW News. These are our top stories. The United States is to pull about 12,000 troops out of Germany. President Trump says the reorganization is to punish Berlin for underspending on defense. The move will reshape NATO deterrence in Europe. It's been met with criticism in the U.S. and in Germany. Four top U.S. tech bosses have faced questions from the U.S. House of Representatives antitrust panel. The leaders of Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon facing allegations of creating unfair market conditions that suppress competition. They deny the allegations. Hong Kong police have arrested 4 students under the territory's new security law, accusing them of, quote, organizing and inciting secession. Beijing imposed that sweeping law July 1st. It makes advocating independence a crime punishable by long prison terms. The countdown is on for the launch of a new mission to Mars, a rocket set to blast off from NASA Mission Control in Cape Canaveral, Florida. It will carry Perseverance, a new rover that will search for signs of life on Mars. This is DW. Thanks for being here.
Negotiations resume today on a compromised coronavirus relief plan. The Trump administration and congressional Democrats are nowhere close to an agreement. They're under pressure because millions of Americans will lose their supplemental unemployment insurance this week. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows sees little chance for a stopgap measure that would extend those benefits. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell calls it the most severe economic downturn in our lifetime. Powell spoke after policymakers promised to use all their tools to support the recovery. The Fed left interest rates near zero. Powell says the central bank will plan for the worst and hope for the best. The number of Americans killed by the coronavirus has now gone over 150,000. Death toll surged to records in some of the hardest-hit states, California, Florida, and Texas. Still, the new wave of infections that began in June appears to have leveled off. And Germany's economy plunged into a record slump in the second quarter. Output fell 10.1%. That's the most since Germany went to quarterly GDP reports in 1970. Coronavirus restrictions led to declines in exports, consumer spending, and investment. Recent indicators signal that growth has returned, but unemployment remains high. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
show called Million Users
Controlled are available now on...
It doesn't take an astrophysicist to work out why Americans need a little extra help right now. 4 million confirmed coronavirus cases and counting. The countries in various states have shut down. Kids are at home, and they may be for a while. If you have a job, you're lucky. If you don't, you're living in fear of not making rent or a mortgage payment. It's all pretty obvious, and that's why the government stepped in to help several months ago and supplemented unemployment benefits. But those benefits are set to expire at the end of this week, and Democrats and Republicans have a $2 trillion disagreement on what to do next. Matthew Iglesias, you dig into these kinds of disagreements for Vox on the Weeds podcast. Republicans unveiled their big coronavirus rescue package on Monday afternoon. What are they calling it?
It's called the HEALS Act. It's a great adventure in acronym formation.
That's health, economic assistance, liability protection, and schools.
HEALS.
Okay. And what's in it?
The most important thing to know is it's $1 trillion, which is smaller than the Democratic proposal.
And we've allocated that in a way that we think makes the most sense for the country at this particular time.
So it contains some of the same stuff as the Democrats do, another round of sort of checks that will go out to most households, which is similar to the Democratic proposal, a little bit less generous. They extend unemployment insurance, but they cut it from $600 a week to $200 a week.
And we want to have something which pays people about 70% wage replacement, which I think is a very fair level. So it's not a fixed number. It's something that pays you a percentage of your wages that are lost.
There's a lot of questions about how that's supposed to work. It contains this big liability protection provision. It was important enough it made it into the acronym. And the idea is to make it hard or impossible for someone to sue a business for saying they're responsible for you getting COVID-19. That's been a sort of important priority for Mitch McConnell.
There have already been 3,500 lawsuits filed. The country cannot stand an epidemic of lawsuits on the heels of the pandemic. We're already working our way through.
Then he's got some money for schools, some money for testing, a small sort of business loan program that's a little bit of an interesting idea, some extra money for the PPP business loan program. Also a little bit of a grab bag of stuff, like there's $2 billion in there to renovate the FBI headquarters.
What? Who is clamoring to renovate the FBI headquarters?
Well, so the FBI headquarters is across the street from the Trump Hotel.
Yeah.
And the FBI, it appeared at one point, wanted to move out of D.C. to a sort of suburban location that would be easier to have, like, scary security features around. President Trump didn't like that idea for whatever reason. He wanted to renovate the existing FBI facility, which I think is full of asbestos, so that's why it's such a hideously expensive project. Anyway, I mean, this is not that important, but Nancy Pelosi has been talking about it a lot. I think to her, it's a signpost of the level of seriousness with which Republicans are undertaking this, that there's no money to, like, support general state and local government budgets in this plan. But there is money for a real estate project that's related to the president's hotel.
And is there money to protect people who might get evicted or who might fall behind on rent as a result of this ongoing crisis we're in?
Most households will get $1,200 more if you have more than one person in your household. So that will help. I mean, there is financial assistance to people. The $200 a week of bonus unemployment insurance is quite a bit stingier than Democrats' proposal, but is quite a bit more generous than simply doing nothing, the situation we're facing this week. So, you know, it's wrong to say they're not doing anything to help people. They're just doing less.
Let's talk about the other plan here. What are the Democrats calling their version?
So Democrats' acronym is the HEROES Act, Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions.
Named for our heroes, whose provisions are largely based on the 4 previous bipartisan bills we have passed.
Why do they all have to be acronyms now? When did that happen?
This is a fascinating story.
Was it the Patriot Act that did this?
The letters stand for uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism.
No, it sort of predates Patriot Act. We didn't do these stunt names on every bill until quite recently, but now, people are working the back channels. They're brainstorming names for these things. It's considered, if they do a new edition of how a bill becomes a law, there's going to have to be, that's like a whole step in the process.
I think there's no better sign of our government largesse than the amount of time and effort that's being spent on these acronyms.
It's great stuff. Particularly good when you can work in a term like omnibus, which I think doesn't mean anything to normal people, but is an important congressional procedure concept, which is that this bill contains a lot of different provisions that cut across different appropriations fiefdoms, so it is an omnibus bill, and good for them.
Okay, well, let's talk about the omnibus. What's in the Democrats' plan?
There's a lot of stuff in the Democrats' plan. So the Democrats' plan is $3 trillion.
So triple the size.
Triple the size. So it's a lot of money. And so they do a lot of stuff.
How much of that money is dedicated to rebuilding the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C.?
So none of it, I think, goes to that important purpose. But there's a few big buckets in the Democrats' bill. One is they are extending the $600 a week bonus unemployment insurance with no big modifications. So that costs a lot of money. It's a lot of help. They are doing the $1,200 checks again, except they are changing it so that children will now count as a full person, worth the entire $1,200 instead of $500. So there's that pillar. Then they have, money for tests, money for virus research, vaccines, things like that. They also have a lot of money for states. They really want to avoid state and local government budget crises. And that's a huge conceptual difference with the Republicans. Then there's some money that's specifically earmarked for schools. Democrats have, since passing this bill, they have sort of raised their ask on the school front. And then they have some money for business loans in there. But I think the most important difference between these bills is $1 trillion versus $3 trillion. And that's what's going to make negotiating hard.
Beyond the immense difference in how much each party wants to spend here, there's also sort of an interesting difference in each party's timeline. The Democrats passed their $3 trillion relief package back in May in the House, and Republicans are just presenting their plan this week with benefits set to expire on Friday, yeah? Why did Republicans wait so long?
This is extremely odd. The main thing is there is disagreement in Republican circles as to whether they should do anything. There's been a significant block of Republican members of Congress who say, we've spent enough money on this. Like, we're done. No more spending. And that's not what most Republicans think, but a lot of them think that. Then Mitch McConnell has wanted to craft a proposal that he can get all Republicans to support. Not because a proposal like that will pass, because he knows he has to deal with Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats, but he wants to strengthen his hand in negotiations by having a unified caucus behind him. And he's been dealing with some very recalcitrant backbench right-wing members who just haven't wanted to agree to anything. And it's really pushed the timeline to a kind of extreme position.
They're going to have 10 business days to figure out a plan, because on August 7th, that's when Senate goes into recess and a deal needs to be done.
All this time that the Republicans have spent is not on working out what's going to happen. It's been on working out what's their initial bid in the negotiation. So it's a huge slippage. The reason Democrats acted fast is that they were hoping to then spend 2 months bargaining with the Republicans. Republicans have been spending all this time bargaining with themselves. So now we're like at the end of the beginning, but still have no clear road forward toward legislation that passes.
After the break, what took Republicans so long and how this might reach a resolution without, throwing a bunch of Americans into the streets. I'm Sean Ramaspuram. It's Today Explained. Minute reinvented Hero, which you can see, and right now Hero is giving health
week. I cover for
an executive live.
How Democrats brought a plan to the table back in May. The Republicans offered one up on Monday, a few days before these unemployment benefits are set to expire. What were the Republicans busy disagreeing about?
Well, so the unemployment benefits has been a source of concern ever since it happened. And the way this worked was originally Democrats wanted to raise the generosity of unemployment insurance benefits so that people would get their sort of full paycheck replaced by the UI system. And then it turned out that state labor departments were not able to do that on a technical basis. It's not how they're set up to work. So Democrats came up with this kludge, which was that they would just enhance benefits by $600 a week. And that meant that on average, you would sort of replace 100% of lost wages. But in detail, it doesn't work like that. Some people are getting more money out of UI than they were actually earning as wages, and other people are getting less. So Lindsey Graham, ever since that first became clear, has been raising a big stink about this.
Our goal is to give you 70% of the money you lost by being unemployed, not to give you a pay raise in unemployment. We've got to fix that.
The argument is, what's the incentive to go back to work if the government's giving you more money to stay at home?
There's an incentive argument, and I also just think, I guess what we technically call a horizontal equity argument. It's like, why should you, the laid-off guy, be making more money than your cousin who's back at work, stocking the shelves at a supermarket? So Republicans are really hung up on this, and they are very interested in making the program less generous. Now, Democrats keep saying, look, what are the jobs that people are going to get? You can look at a million indicators, right? Whether it's wage levels, job openings, there's just no sign that there's a practical problem of unemployed people refusing to take jobs because the UI is so generous. And Democrats are saying, look, this bonus money, it's incredibly well targeted. It's going to people who are using the money to pay the rent, make ends meet. It's preventing problems, down the road, homelessness, cascading defaults, and then they're spending the money. These are people who, you're unemployed, right? So you get money, you buy groceries, you go out, it keeps the economy going. And Democrats are saying, look, if we pull this rug out from under people, they're not going to have an incentive to do anything. The economy is comatose because of the virus. All we're going to have is people going bankrupt, people unable to pay the bills, people unable to make the rent, and we're going to be, at worst, in a humanitarian catastrophe. At best, trying to fix the problem on the back end.
But this isn't just Democrats versus Republicans. This is also Republicans versus Republicans?
Yeah, there is one set of Republicans who I think have become true believers on anti-stimulus politics. What did Republicans say in 2009, 2010, 2012, when President Obama kept saying, we need to spend more money to keep the economy going? Republicans were saying back then, no, spending money doesn't help the economy. So today, one block of Republicans is ha, we're hypocrites. Now that there's a Republican in the White House, we do believe in spending money to help the economy. But another block of Republicans are true believers.
A number of senators at lunch get up and say, well, gosh, we need $20 billion for this, we need $100 billion for this, and they're just really eager to spend money. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
And they're saying, look, we didn't want to do this when Obama was president. We didn't want to do it when Trump is president. It's just not good to have the federal government spending money.
Just to be clear here, is this more about, you shouldn't be getting paid more to stay at home than your cousin who's going to work every day at Whole Foods? Or you shouldn't be getting paid this much money not to do anything because you'll never want to go back to work? Or is it about we just shouldn't be spending this much money and adding trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to the deficit?
Well, it's about both of those things, right? Because if you just had this worry about the incentives, if that was the only thing you cared about, you could come up with a workaround. You could say, okay, we're going to give less money in unemployment insurance, but we're going to spend trillions of dollars on stimulating the economy through some other means. But Republicans don't want to do that, right? They want a small bill. So with a small bill, you would say, okay, then we have to target everything hyper effectively. And that means being very generous to the worst off people. But Republicans don't like that idea, because they think it damages incentives. So they're caught between the pressure to keep the overall costs down, but also to avoid being too generous to the poorest. And they've come out with a bill that's like a little bit neither fish nor fowl, and it just reflects those internal caucus dynamics rather than, I would say, an economic analysis of the situation.
So who holds the upper hand in this fight? Is it Democrats? Is it Republicans?
So by the oddball rules of Congress, who holds the upper hand depends on what Republicans do next. If McConnell can get all his people together behind this and get a majority for it, then he has a strong hand, because Democrats are saying unemployment expiration is so terrible, but it will have already expired. So $200 is better than $0. So really, why are Democrats holding off? Why are they stonewalling? Blah, 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 blah. And supposedly Democrats will be under pressure to come down closer to McConnell's number. On the other hand, if 3 or 4 Republicans break from the party on this, because they say we should spend $0, then that weakens McConnell's hand, because now House Democrats have passed a bill and Senate Republicans have done nothing. And at that point, more vulnerable Senate Republicans like Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, they need to start saying, hey, Democrats, can we work a deal? This is like weird Capitol Hill stuff that it should all hinge on exactly how nutty does Rand Paul want to be. So we're going to have to see, like, how much does the GOP caucus come together around this and say, like, here we stand, this is what we're going to do, or how much does this kind of effort to duct tape over divisions in the caucus start to break down and change the dynamic again?
From everything we've covered, it seems deeply unlikely that they'll figure it all out by Friday. What does that mean for, I'm guessing, what, tens of millions of Americans who are depending on these benefits?
So one thing they could do is quickly, Wednesday or Thursday, put on the floor an unemployment extension for like 3 or 4 weeks, right? And say, okay, well, we're going to just keep this going in the short term while we keep negotiating. That's a kind of classic Congress move, kick the can a little bit down the road rather than resolve issues. Nobody thinks that would be a good idea, but it would be the most humane solution at this point, because clearly they're not going to reach an agreement in the next 3 days.
All told, it just feels like the government abdicated its responsibility to handle this pandemic particularly well, and now it feels like the government's on the cusp of abdicating its responsibility to take care of people who are terrified or can't even go back to work. I wonder, as the rest of the world seems to be inching towards reopening and returning to whatever version of normal they can muster, is the United States at risk of really falling behind here as cases continue to climb, states continue to shut down, and the government fights over how to take care of people who are caught in the balance?
It's really embarrassing. I think if you look at the two parties, one thing you see here is that actual members of Congress who are Democrats are really into the nuts and bolts of governance. They have like a lot of feelings and thoughts about Medicaid matching rates and food stamp funding and state and local grant programs. And like, this is what they actually live for. Congressional Republicans really don't. They are really jazzed up about like fighting about the 1619 Project or talking about whether there's too much violence happening in the Portland protests. Like those kinds of things animate them. And people in the media industry often also like to engage with those kind of topics and just like sort of assume that like somebody is governing the country. But when Republicans have the majority, the fact that it took them 10 weeks to bother coming up with this bill, it's just a signpost that a lot of their members are not that engaged with this kind of thing. They weren't like, let's drop everything and figure out what we're going to do here. They kept kind of fighting or having vague positions. Some members worked very earnestly on this, but a lot of them didn't. And unfortunately, like, millions of people's lives are impacted in a very direct way by the kind of boring minutiae of how the welfare state operates. And it's a big problem that the governing party in the United States is not that interested in this question.
Okay, Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Back and just let them do what they do.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're the professionals, right? We just eat.
When did you decide to hold your own carnival party? When did you make that decision?
Well, like I said, we were always planning to do something in our backyard this year, but we decided last week or 2 weeks prior, when we were able to assemble 100 people safely, let's do 20 or 25 people because, we'll be safe, we'll follow the guidelines, and we'll celebrate. So we decided last 2 weeks, to put this thing together.
So
and,
was that a rush to get everything together?
No, I've got everything on site. I used to be a DJ in Trinidad for 8 years, so the music...
That's some number. Never been anything like that number.
He insisted that his administration is also strongly protecting the environment. Trump cited the tremendous job growth in the energy field before the coronavirus outbreak started. He also criticized the prior Obama administration's energy policies. Trump also attended a private Republican fundraiser in the Lone Star State. Lawmakers being told to mask up. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi making it mandatory in the chamber. The new rule came hours after Congressman Louis Gohmert tested positive for coronavirus. He's refused to wear a mask and found out he was infected just before a flight with President Trump. And Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg back in the hospital, but not expected to stay long. She was hospitalized in New York to undergo a non-surgical procedure. That's politics. Mark Mayfield, NBC News Radio.
President Trump says his administration has inked a major deal with Kodak to produce pharmaceutical products in the U.S. Trump said the deal was made under the Defense Production Act. He said Kodak will begin producing generic pharmaceutical ingredients that he believes will make drug costs more competitive.
It will produce as much as 25% of all active ingredients needed to make generic drugs in the USA.
An Indiana musician is trying to encourage people to wear masks with a parody of You'll Be Back, the King George song from the musical Hamilton.
You're dead wrong, and time will tell that you didn't listen to science or history too well.
Mikey Good says he hopes people get the point that mask wearing doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. Health updates, Sarah Lee Kessler, NBC News Radio.
As Congress continues wrangling over a new coronavirus relief package, for now, the Federal Reserve is the economy's primary backstop, keeping interest rates near zero, buying up assets, keeping lending facilities open. But as Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said, the Fed can only lend money, only Congress can spend it, and he's encouraging them to do just that. The service sector workers will especially need the help, even if economic reopenings go well.
I can't say what the exact level should be. It's not our role, but they're going to need support if they're to be able to pay their bills, to continue spending money, to remain in their current rental house or apartment or a house if they own it. So I think there will be a need.
Powell says the economy has recovered about a third of the jobs lost in March and April and about half the consumer spending, faster than expected. But those gains are now leveling off, at least, as the coronavirus keeps surging.
The path of the economy is going to depend to a very high extent on the course of the virus and on the measures that we take to keep it in check. That is just a very fundamental fact about our economy right now. The two things are not in conflict. Social distancing measures and fast reopening of the economy, they actually go together. They're not in competition with each other.
Another major retailer, Kohl's this time, is announcing plans to close for Thanksgiving Day, an easier call with everything expected to be different this holiday season, including no big surging crowds fighting for big screens allowed. In a statement, Kohl says, given the importance of safety and convenience, we expect more consumers to shop earlier, search for great deals throughout the season, and take advantage of our online and omni-channel conveniences. And KFC is launching a line of footwear, shoes that smell like fried chicken, and are decorated with buckets of chicken stripes in the bottom and a chicken-looking skin on top. The limited edition Kentucky Fried Chicken X Crocs went on sale Tuesday for $59.99, and the stock sold out in 30 minutes. Consumer and business news, Joe McConnell, NBC News Radio.
The news you want, when you want it. You're listening to NBC News Radio on iHeartRadio.
President Trump says the U.S. is now leading the world in oil and natural gas production. Trump traveled to an oil rig in Texas and called it a dominant position.
Under the Trump administration, the United States has increased oil production by 3.1 million barrels per day. That's some number. Never been anything like that number.
He insisted that his administration is also strongly protecting the environment. Trump cited the tremendous job growth in the energy field before the coronavirus outbreak started. He also criticized the prior Obama administration's energy policies. Trump also attended a private Republican fundraiser in the Lone Star State. Lawmakers being told to mask up. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi making it mandatory in the chamber. The new rule came hours after Congressman Louis Gohmert tested positive for coronavirus. He's refused to wear a mask and found out he was infected just before a flight with President Trump. And Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg back in the hospital, but not expected to stay long. She was hospitalized in New York to undergo a non-surgical procedure. That's politics. Mark Mayfield, NBC News Radio.
President Trump says his administration has inked a major deal with Kodak to produce pharmaceutical products in the U.S. Trump said the deal was made under the Defense Production Act. He said Kodak will begin producing generic pharmaceutical ingredients that he believes will make drug costs more competitive.
It will produce as much as 25% of all active ingredients needed to make generic drugs in the USA.
An Indiana musician is trying to encourage people to wear masks with a parody of You'll Be Back, the King George song from the musical Hamilton.
You're dead wrong, and time will tell that you didn't listen to science or history too well.
Mikey Good says he hopes people get the point that mask wearing doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. Health updates, Sarah Lee Kessler, NBC News Radio.
As Congress continues wrangling over a new coronavirus relief package, for now, the Federal Reserve is the economy's primary backstop, keeping interest rates near zero, buying up assets, keeping lending facilities open. But as Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said,
there's Chuck. This is short stuff. Let's go.
Hey ho, let's go with the Habsburgs. God. Take two. Habsburg Jaw.
Yeah, the Habsburgs. Oh man, I hadn't said it out loud until just now. We're in big trouble. The Habsburg's Jaw.
I think the tendency is to want to say Habsburg with a P, but it's Habsburg with a B.
Although in America we've added the P, and it's just so prevalent now, and we're America. That's what it is now. It's Habsburg.
Yeah, with a B as in, boy, would you look at that jaw?
Right. This is not to be confused. The Habsburg Jaw is not to be confused with the Habsburg Jaw, which is what happens when you walk into a Habsburg diamond store. Your jaw hits the floor because the prices are so reasonable on really great jewelry.
Oh, man, if you don't get a kickback on that. I just see you next time and you've got the big love-hate diamond rings, like Radio Raheem from Do the Right Thing.
I want a love-hate diamond grill.
Sweet.
I wonder how that'd sound podcasting.
Probably not great.
Well, Habsburg Diamonds, let's figure it out, you know?
All right, so who we're talking about are the Habsburgs, and they were a big ruling family in, kind of all over the place in Europe. At the peak of their fame, I guess, or the peak of their rule, they had Austria, Hungary, Slovenia, Bohemia, Slovakia, Croatia, and a little bit of Italy, Romania, and Poland, all under their purview.
Yeah. Like, not just their purview, under their thumb, in their iron grip of this dynastic family that ruled these areas for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
I mean, up until 1918, it took the First World War to break up the Habsburg dynasty.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It really is, because they originally came to power, Chuck, in, I think, the 13th century in Germany, when a guy named Rudolph I became the Roman German king, which is, nothing to sneeze at for sure. But apparently he had a rival in nearby Austria in the form of Ottokar il Premizel. I'm going with Premizel.
Yeah, it feels like there should be another vowel in there, but there's not. So
that Y is doing like double or triple duty right there, but it's working. Well, anyway, we're going to call him Ottokar. Ottokar said, you know what, I don't really recognize you as the Roman German king, so we're going to be rivals, which really doesn't matter in this story beyond the fact that it drew Rudolph I's attention to Austria. And so when Ottokar was killed, he kind of moved in and set up shop and basically took over Austria.
Yeah, and so that's where they got their start, and then for the next century, basically, they really did a lot of conquering. They took over. I don't want to say something dumb in front of you.
It's great. It's charming.
They took over the Tyrol, which is the place in the Alps that Austria and northern Italy shared in the mid-1300s.
Yeah, and also, Chuck, where Uzi lived and died thousands of years earlier.
That's right.
He was Tyrolean.
And by the time the 1500s rolled around is when they were really rolling. The Emperor Maximilian, or I guess future Emperor, married Charles the Bold's daughter, Mary, and then all of a sudden they had control of Burgundy and also a little cachet.
Yeah, from what I understand, like that was an enormous move. So they were making all sorts of moves, right? They were making moves, gaining and consolidating power through conquering, through marrying. Well, just basically those two things. But it was working for them big time.
I bet there was one more thing.
Let's see. How would you do that? You would conquer things, you would marry people, and then you would be known for sending really great thank you notes as follow-ups.
Sure.
That could definitely win you some friends.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what the third thing was.
So here's the deal with this jaw, because you saw the title of the episode and you've heard us say that a couple of times, is they had jaws that would make Jay Leno blush. If you looked up some of these folks, Joseph I, Charles I of Spain, Charles II, Leopold Wilhelm, they had this very, very prominent lower jaw. And basically, people got together and studied this over the years, and we'll get a little bit more into why this happens. And they said, we're just going to go ahead and name this the Habsburg Jaw because it's so prevalent in this family line.
Yep. And they did. That's why everybody calls it the Habsburg Jaw. And if you have never seen it before, you probably have and didn't really realize it. But if you haven't, either way, just go look up Habsburg Jaw, Habsburg, Jaw. And it will bring up some old-timey Middle Ages, Renaissance era oil paintings. And you will see quite clearly what people are talking about when they say the Habsburg Jaw.
So if you haven't seen it before, it's just a very prominent lower jaw, and there's an underbite, and it's very distinctive.
Yeah, and if you're driving or something right now and you can't look it up, like the cartoonish characters of like the Blue Bloods who are like, oh, that's astounding. that face that the cartoon makes is they're drawn with the Habsburg jaw. They're actually making fun of aristocrats, as we'll see in a minute.
And here's the thing: we don't want to make fun of anyone that has something like this, but we were just trying to figure out a good way to describe it. It's a prominent lower jaw, such that there's even an underbite.
Yeah. So well, let's take a break real quick, and we'll come back and talk about it a little bit more. Okay?
Yes.
Learning stuff with Joshua and Charles. Stuff you should know.
Hi, I'm Heidi Murkoff, host of the upcoming What to Expect podcast on iHeartRadio. Motherhood is the ultimate sisterhood, but did you know that black moms in the U.S. are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related malaria?
John Horn, host of...
A statement is not...
Here's Mulan model now. Listen.
All right, Chuck, so we're back, and we were talking, kind of describing the Habsburg jaw. There's actually a medical term for it, because the Habsburgs aren't the only ones who have this jaw, and you can have it to varying degrees, but technically it's called mandibular prognathism, and that is where the lower jaw juts really far forward so that you have what you would colloquially call an underbite, right? But with the Habsburg jaw in particular, it's to such a degree that the teeth no longer even line up. It's just really sticking out there, this mandibular prognathism. And then what they also figured out is that the Habsburg also had something called mandibular deficiency too, right?
Yeah, and that can affect your ability to eat, your ability to speak. And, I don't have anything to this degree, but, if you remember from bruxism, I've got a sort of an even bite, and my lower jaw sticks out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not Habsburgian.
No.
But I feel their pain.
With the Habsburg jaw in particular, it's pronounced enough to a degree that the musculoskeletal composition is it's different. It's just a very prominent look, like you said. So what they figured out was that because of this, and based on some documentary evidence too, that some Habsburgs, at least, I believe Charles II, the ruler of Spain, there's a contemporary account of him from the 18th century that basically said, his jaw was so out of line, his teeth were so out of line because of this jaw, he couldn't chew. He had to swallow his food whole.
Can we just read this? It's so great.
Yeah.
This is from Spain under Charles II by Alexander Stanhope.
That's Doug Stanhope's grandfather.
Wait, who's Doug Stanhope?
The stand-up comedian.
Oh, that's right. And he was speaking about Charles II. He has a ravenous stomach and swallows all he eats whole, for his nether jaw stands so much out that his 2 rows of teeth cannot meet, to compensate which he has a prodigious wide throat, so that a gizzard or liver of a hen passes down whole, and his weak stomach, not being able to digest it, he voids in the same manner.
So he's just pooping out whole chicken gizzards.
Gizzard in, gizzard out.
Yeah, that's the old statement. So when people started talking about the Habsburg jaw, it's because they figured out over time, this is a real thing, and it was very distinct for this family. And it became a thing years ago, centuries ago. People were aware of the Habsburg jaw and just remarked on it. But it wasn't until, I believe, the 21st century that people started doing studies on it as best they could. I guess you could say they're kind of made-up studies, in that there was no actual genetic testing to figure out what accounted for the Habsburg jaw. But they were doing the best they could based on portraiture of prominent Habsburgs, and came up with some pretty interesting stuff.
Well, yeah, do we need a drum roll here to say what's actually going on?
If you haven't figured it out by now, then sure, we'll give you a drum roll. Dave, will you put a drum roll in, please?
All righty. The Habsburgs like to keep it in the family. And when we say keep it in the family, we mean really keep it in the family. This jaw was a result, pretty obviously, of inbreeding.
Yes, which is not to say that anybody who has mandibular prognathism today is the result of inbreeding.
Of course not. Yeah, I mean, it's a recessive trait, and, when people that aren't in the same family get together, you're going to have those heterozygous genes, and they're going to carry different traits, and that's all how it's supposed to work. But if you are in the same family, that may not be the case if you have homozygous alleles and get together with a family member and make another family member. They're going to have those same traits.
Right, because the chromosomes are going to be so similar that the chances of both parents having the recessive gene and donating that to the kid really increases the likelihood of that kid having that recessive trait. There's a guy that's quoted in this article. He's a geneticist named, this guy's name is great, Montgomery Slatkin.
That's a great name.
He says that if you are a child of inbreeding, you have your chances are hundreds of thousands of times greater of receiving these recessive traits than of children of parents who aren't related in any way.
That's right.
So that was it. The Habsburgs, they wanted to consolidate power so much so that they just said, you're marrying your sister whether you like it or not. And the son would say, but Dad... And that's it for Short Stuff, everybody.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
There are things that happen on Twitter that a lot of...
Guys, we did it. We did it. The news, yoga, today explained. A short episode of Stuff You Should Know, and we did it all while high. All we need now is an affirmation. I guess to save my plant from dying, or not to save my plant from dying. Noodle, don't noodle. You're too worried about what once was and not what will be. However, there's a saying, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Guys, thank you so much for... I see a cat. There's a cat right above my finger. Right there. That's a cat. I'll see you guys later. Have a good day.